My name is Cora Shaw. For the past decade, my life has been shaped by the earth, not in some grand, poetic sense, but in the practical, hands-on way of a landscape architect. I spend my days designing spaces for others to find peace in, corporate courtyards, public parks, the quiet gardens of private homes. I coax life from dormant soil, arranging stone and water and light into gentle patterns. My work often takes me away from my own small corner of the world, sending me to cities up and down the coast to oversee projects, consult with clients, and walk through plots of land, imagining what they could become. It's a life of quiet observation and patient creation, and I've always found a deep satisfaction in it. My own home is a testament to this philosophy. It's a small cottage, nestled on the edge of Port Blossom, a town that prides itself on its art galleries and ancient cedar trees. The house itself is nothing remarkable: weathered gray siding, a porch swing I rarely use, and windows that catch the morning sun. But the garden is my sanctuary. It's where I've poured all the love and attention I can't always find a place for elsewhere. I know every plant by name, every patch of soil by its texture and needs. It's a living, breathing extension of myself, a place I return to after my travels to feel rooted and whole. I came home last week after 10 days in Portland, supervising the final installation of a botanical garden for a new community center. The trip had been rewarding but draining. I'd spent long hours under the Oregon sun, my hands stained with dirt, my mind a catalog of irrigation schedules and planting depths. All I wanted was the familiar comfort of my own space, the scent of lavender and damp earth that always greeted me at the door. Instead, I was greeted by Mr. Gable. He lives next door, a gentle widower in his late 70s who tends to his own prize-winning roses with a devotion that borders on religious. He was trimming a climbing rose that had begun to stray over the shared fence, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked up as I pulled into my driveway, his kind, wrinkled face clouding with something I couldn't quite name. It looked like concern. "Cora, my dear. Welcome home," he said, his voice a soft, gravelly hum. "It's good to be back, Mr. Gable," I smiled, feeling the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. The simple kindness of a good neighbor was a balm after the anonymity of a hotel. He set his shears down on the low stone wall that separated our properties. He hesitated, rubbing a gloved thumb over a stray leaf. "Cora, is everything all right at your house?" I blinked, my keys still in my hand. "Yes, of course. Why do you ask?" He looked past me, towards my quiet cottage, then back at me. His gaze was direct, but not accusatory. "Well, it's just that we've heard some rather strange disturbances while you were away. My wife, before she passed, was a very light sleeper, and I suppose I've inherited the habit." My heart gave a little flutter of unease. "Disturbances? What sort of disturbances?" "Shouting," he said, his voice dropping lower. "Not arguments, not exactly. It was different. A strange kind of laughter, too. And music, very late at night. It happened a few nights ago, and the night before that. It was loud enough to wake me. I almost came over to check, but, well, I didn't want to intrude." A nervous laugh escaped me. It sounded hollow in the quiet afternoon air. "Mr. Gable, that's not possible. The house has been empty. I was in Portland." He didn't argue. He just gave me a long, searching look, one filled with a sad sort of understanding. "If you say so, dear," he said softly. "Perhaps it was just the wind carrying sounds from downtown. It can play tricks on you." He turned back to his roses, and I was left standing on my own gravel driveway, a cold seed of dread planting itself in my stomach. I knew Mr. Gable. He was not a man prone to fantasy or exaggeration. If he said he heard something, he heard something. I unlocked my front door, the familiar click of the lock doing little to reassure me. The house was silent, steeped in the late afternoon light. Everything looked normal. At first. But as I walked through the small living room, I began to feel a subtle, pervasive sense of wrongness, like a painting that's been hung a single degree off-center. The air didn't smell of the faint, dusty potpourri I kept in a bowl on the mantelpiece. It smelled faintly of something else, something spicy and foreign, like sandalwood incense. Then I noticed the book on the end table. It was a collection of Rilke's poetry, one of my favorites. but it wasn't where I'd left it. I always leave my books face down to mark my page. This one was closed, a dried lavender stem tucked inside as a bookmark. I don't use dried lavender as bookmarks. A shiver traced its way down my spine. I moved through the house with a growing sense of trespass, as if I were the intruder. In the kitchen, the counters were wiped clean, gleaming under the light in a way they never did when I was the one doing the cleaning. I'm tidy, but I'm not a gleamer. A small, handcrafted clay mug sat by the sink, one I didn't recognize. Upstairs, my bedroom door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The sight that met me made my breath catch in my throat. My bed was made. Not just the way I make it, a quick pull of the duvet, a fluff of the pillows. This was hotel perfect. The corners of the sheets were tucked with military precision, the quilt smoothed into a flawless expanse, a decorative throw I hadn't used in years folded artfully at its foot. That's when the dread solidified into a cold, hard certainty. Only one person would take the time to make my bed with that much intention, believing it to be an act of love rather than a violation. I pulled out my phone, my fingers feeling clumsy and stiff. I dialed my mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice as light and airy as always. "Cora, darling. How was Portland? Did the dogwoods bloom on schedule?" "It was fine, Mom," I said, my voice flat. "Quick question. Were you in my house while I was away?" There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause. "Oh, I stopped by to check on your garden, of course. The hydrangeas were looking a bit thirsty. You really must remember to water them more deeply before you leave." "And did you come inside?" "Well, I had to use the loo," she laughed, a sound that usually charmed people but now grated on my nerves. "And while I was there, I couldn't help but notice the state of your bedroom. Honestly, Cora, you work so hard. The least I can do is make sure you come home to a peaceful space." I straightened up a bit. I closed my eyes, picturing her moving through my rooms, touching my things, rearranging my life into an order that suited her. "Mom, we've talked about this. I like my space the way it is." "Oh, don't be so sensitive. It's what mothers do." "I just tidied the living room and wiped down the kitchen. And I reorganized your spice rack. You had 3 jars of cumin, dear. Nobody needs that much cumin." My hand tightened on my phone. "You didn't bring anyone with you, did you?" "Of course not. Why would you even ask such a thing? It was just me." "Don't be silly." Her denial was too quick, too bright. But I didn't have the energy to dissect it, not then. Arguing with my mother was like trying to catch mist in my hands. We spoke for a few more minutes about things that didn't matter, the weather, a cousin's new baby, her latest pottery class, and then we hung up. I sat on the edge of my perfectly made bed, the unfamiliar scent of sandalwood clinging to the air. Mr. Gable had heard shouting. He had heard music and laughter. My mother had admitted to being here, but her version of events, a quiet session of rogue tidying, didn't match the disturbance he'd described. A gap of understanding yawned between the two stories, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that something dark and unspoken was living in that gap. To understand my mother, you have to understand the philosophy she and my father built their lives around. They weren't hippies in the tie-dye and peace sign sense. They were intellectuals, former academics who, in their youth, had embraced a brand of communal idealism. They spoke of deconstructing ownership, of radical sharing, and the tyranny of the individual. In their world, property was a burden, privacy a form of selfishness. A life well lived was a life shared, porous, and open to the needs of the community. It sounded beautiful in theory. In practice, growing up, it was simply confusing. I am the older sister. Lena, my younger sister by 3 years, was born with a delicate, artistic soul, or so my parents always said. She was the dreamer, the painter, the one who felt things too deeply. I was the practical one, the steady one, the one who, from a young age, understood how things worked. This dynamic became the foundation of our family's unique economy of sharing. When I was 7, I was given a beautiful porcelain doll for my birthday, with painted blue eyes and a lace dress. I adored it. A week later, Lena broke her own doll. My parents sat me down in the living room, the air thick with gentle disappointment. Cora, my father said, his voice soft and reasonable, Lena is heartbroken. You have a doll. You're strong enough to understand. Wouldn't the loving thing be to share your joy with her? Sharing, in this instance, meant giving her my doll. Permanently. This pattern repeated itself throughout our childhood. My larger bedroom was communal space when Lena wanted to practice her dance routines. My books were not mine, but a family library she could borrow from and never return. My savings from a part-time job in high school were pooled resources when she needed new canvases for her art class. The sharing was always a one-way street, flowing from me, the capable one, to her, the fragile one. If I resisted, I wasn't just being selfish, I was being unenlightened, attached to the material plane, and failing to live up to the family's values. Lena never had to share a thing. Her space was sacred, her possessions extensions of her artistic expression. I learned to build walls inside myself, to hold on to things quietly, to never love a material object too much because I knew it could be redistributed at any moment. When I finally graduated from university and started my career, the first thing I did was save for a place of my own. Buying the cottage in Port Blossom wasn't just a financial investment, it was an act of reclamation. It was a space with doors I could close, a garden that was unequivocally mine. It was three-dimensional, tangible proof that I could have something that did not need to be shared. My parents, of course, were quietly appalled. All this space, just for you, my mother had murmured during her first visit, her eyes scanning the spare bedroom. It seems a bit excessive, don't you think? Lena, meanwhile, was struggling. She was married to a musician named Mark, and they lived with their two small children in a cramped apartment above a noisy cafe. My parents' visits to me were always followed by phone calls filled with sighs and heavy silences. Lena's children barely have room to play, my father would say. She feels so stifled, creatively. It's not fair that you have so much and she has so little. The implication was always there, hanging in the air between us. I should do something. At first, I did. I bought groceries, paid for a babysitter so they could have a night out, and covered the cost of an emergency plumbing repair. But it was never enough. What they wanted was something I couldn't give. They wanted me to sell my cottage, my sanctuary, and give the profit to Lena so she could have the life they felt she deserved. You're hardly ever there anyway. With all your travel, my mother had said once, her voice deceptively casual. It's just an empty house. I said no. For the first time in my life, I drew a line in the sand that was not to be crossed. I said it calmly, firmly, and without the apology they expected. The fallout was a profound and wounded silence. For months, our communication was reduced to terse holiday texts and awkward, third-party pleasantries passed through other relatives. Then, about a year ago, my mother called, her voice bright again. Darling, I was just thinking. With all your trips, you must worry about your garden. I'd be happy to pop over and water things for you. It felt like an olive branch. A way back into their good graces without having to sacrifice my home. I was so relieved, so desperate to mend the rift, that I agreed. And so it began. First, it was just watering. Then it was weeding. Then came the tidying, the reorganizing, the gentle, insistent incursions into my personal space. Each time, I'd protest weakly, and she'd brush it off with a laugh. Oh, Cora, it's just my way of showing I care. I let it happen because it was easier than facing the silence again. I let it happen because a small, childish part of me was still grateful for any form of affection, even this invasive, controlling kind. But now, standing in my too-perfect bedroom, I thought about Mr. Gable's words. I pulled out my planner and cross-referenced my travel dates. He'd mentioned hearing noises back in the spring, around early April. I had been in Seattle for 4 days. He'd mentioned another time in late July. I was on a site visit near Lake Tahoe. A cold, sickening thought began to dawn. Around the same time my mother's caring had escalated, Lena and her family had miraculously moved. They'd left their cramped apartment for a spacious rental house on the other side of town, one with a yard and a studio space for her. When I'd asked how they'd managed it, Lena had been vague. We've had some help, she'd said with a dismissive wave of her hand. I had chosen not to press her. I had chosen not to connect the dots because I think, on some level, I was terrified of the picture they might create. I had let myself believe my mother was just an overbearing cleaner and my sister had gotten lucky. But the shouting, the music, the sandalwood incense, and the unfamiliar mug in my sink told a different story. They were pieces of a puzzle I had deliberately avoided solving. Now, I knew I couldn't look away any longer. My house wasn't just being tidied. It was being used. And I had no idea what for. I have always believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt, especially my own family. I wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation, a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a single, honest conversation. But the Cora who believed in simple, honest conversations with her parents was a younger, more naive version of myself. The woman standing in her violated home knew better. Trust had to be earned, and clarity, I was beginning to realize, was something I would have to create for myself. My next work trip was already on the calendar, a 5-day conference in Vancouver. It was the perfect opportunity. Before I left, I did something I never imagined I would do. I purchased 5 small, high-definition cameras, the kind that are barely noticeable, designed for home security. The act of buying them felt sordid and shameful, a betrayal of the open, trusting person I wanted to be. But the need to know the truth was stronger than my shame. I installed them carefully, my heart thudding with a mixture of guilt and resolve. One was tucked behind a stack of art books on the living room shelf. Another was placed high on a kitchen cabinet, its lens disguised as a screw head. I put one in the main hallway, nestled within a cluster of dried flowers in a vase, and another just inside the front entryway. The last one, the one that felt like the greatest transgression, I placed on the bookshelf in my bedroom, its tiny eye looking out over the space I considered most private. The night before my flight, I sent my mother a carefully worded text. Heading to Vancouver tomorrow for the week. Thanks for offering to water the garden, but please, just the garden this time. I'd really appreciate it if you didn't go inside the house. I need to feel like it's my own space to come back to. Her reply came almost instantly. Of course, darling. I'll respect your boundaries. Have a safe trip. The cheerful exclamation point at the end felt like a little twist of the knife. The first 2 days of the conference were a blur of keynote speakers and networking events. In the evenings, I would return to my sterile hotel room, open my laptop, and log into the camera feed. My house was a series of silent, still images. On the second day, I watched as my mother's car pulled into the driveway. She got out, watered the potted plants on my porch with painstaking care, and then, after a moment's hesitation, she walked around to the back garden, just as I'd asked. I felt a wave of relief so profound it almost made me dizzy. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe I had let my imagination run away with me. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. On the third night, everything changed. I logged on around 9 p.m., my laptop balanced on the hotel bed. The house was dark and quiet. I was about to close the feed when the camera in the entryway detected motion. The front door opened. A man I had never seen before stepped inside. He was tall, with a salt and pepper beard, and he carried a yoga mat under one arm. He didn't knock. He didn't hesitate. He moved with a quiet familiarity, slipping off his shoes and placing them neatly by the door as if he'd done it 100 times. A few minutes later, 2 women entered together, laughing softly. Then another man and another woman. Within 20 minutes, a stream of strangers had passed through my front door, none of them looking like they were there for a simple social call. They were all dressed in loose, comfortable clothing, and they moved with a serene, purposeful air that was deeply unsettling. I switched the view to the living room camera. My living room had been transformed. My furniture had been pushed back against the walls to create a large, open space in the center. Cushions from my sofa were arranged in a circle on the floor. The air was hazy with the smoke from the same sandalwood incense I'd smelled before. The strangers were sitting in the circle, their eyes closed. Then my mother and father walked into the frame. My father was carrying a small drum. My mother was lighting candles, placing them carefully around the room. They weren't guests, they were hosts. They moved around the circle, speaking in low, murmuring tones to the participants. I turned up the audio, my hand trembling. "Release the tension held in the body," my mother was saying. This is a safe space. A space for authentic expression. Here, you're free to let go. The man with the drum began to play a soft, rhythmic beat. The people in the circle began to sway. Then, one of the women began to cry a low, guttural sob that grew in intensity. Another person began to laugh, a wild, uninhibited sound that bordered on hysteria. Soon, the room was filled with a cacophony of emotional release, weeping, shouting, laughing, moaning. This was the screaming Mr. Gable had heard. It wasn't a fight. It was some kind of catharsis. A performance of pain and joy, staged in the middle of my living room. I felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if I were watching a film set in a house that only looked like mine. These were my parents, using my home, my sanctuary, as a venue for their own brand of therapeutic theater. They had taken the place I had created for my own peace and turned it into a stage for other people's chaos. I watched Frozen for over an hour. I saw them guide people through strange, intimate exercises. I saw a man and a woman, both strangers to me, locked in an embrace on my rug, weeping onto its fibers. I saw my father place his hands on a woman's shoulders as she screamed into a cushion. I saw my mother walking through the room, her face serene and knowing, like a high priestess in her temple. My temple. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, startling me. It was an alert from my credit card company. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. A text from my sister, Lena. Mom and Dad are doing another one of their workshops tonight. I hope it goes well. The last one brought in almost $2,000. We can finally get the car fixed. The words on the screen swam before my eyes. $2,000. It all clicked into place with a sickening finality. This wasn't just a misguided attempt to relive their communal past. This was a business. They were charging people for these workshops. They were renting out my home, my privacy, my peace of mind, and using the profits to fund my sister's life. The new house, the car repairs, it was all paid for by the violation of my own. I closed the laptop with a sharp snap. The silence of the hotel room rushed in, vast and empty. I felt hollowed out, scoured clean of any lingering innocence I might have had about my family. The betrayal wasn't just that they had lied. It was that they had commercialized my life, packaged my home, and sold it without my knowledge or consent. They hadn't just crossed a boundary. They had bulldozed it, built a business on top of it, and sent the invoice to my sister. A knock at my hotel room door made me jump. Room service. I hadn't ordered anything. I sat motionless on the bed, staring at the door, my heart pounding a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. For a terrifying moment, the line between my safe hotel room and my invaded home blurred completely, and I felt as though anyone, any stranger, could walk in at any time. The call came the next morning, just as I was checking out of the hotel. It was a local Port Blossom number I didn't recognize. "Is this Cora Shaw?" a crisp, official-sounding voice asked. "Yes, this is she." "Ms. Shaw, this is Officer Reed from the Port Blossom Police Department. We're at your residence on Chestnut Lane. We received a noise complaint from a neighbor around 11 p.m. last night. When we arrived, we found a gathering in progress. Your parents, Simon and Diana Shaw, are here. They informed us that they had your permission to be using the property for a private event." I stood in the busy hotel lobby, the world receding to a dull roar around me. "They did not have my permission," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I cleared my throat and tried again, forcing strength into my words. "They did not have my permission. I am the sole homeowner, and I am currently out of town." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I see. Your parents are also claiming that the small cameras we found inside the residence constitute an illegal recording of their guests." "Those are my cameras." "In my house," I said, a cold anger beginning to replace the shock. "I installed them because I suspected they were using my home without my knowledge." "Right. Well, it's a bit of a tangled situation, Ms. Shaw. It appears they were collecting money for these sessions. That could involve business licensing and zoning violations. And the guests were certainly not aware they were being filmed. We had to shut it down. Your parents have been asked to come down to the station to provide a formal statement." He paused. "You'll likely need to provide one as well when you return." "I understand," I said. "Thank you, officer." I hung up the phone and stood still for a long moment, my suitcase handle clutched in my hand. So, one of their guests had discovered a camera. The police had been called. The secret was out, not because of my confrontation, but because of their own carelessness. 15 minutes later, as I sat in the back of a taxi heading to the airport, my phone rang again. It was my mother. I let it ring, the sound shrill and demanding. It stopped, then immediately started again. This time I answered. "Cora," she began, her voice tight with a frantic, controlled energy. "You need to fix this." Not, "I'm so sorry." Not, "Let me explain." But, "You need to fix this." "Fix what, Mom?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "The police. You have to call them back. You have to tell them it was all a misunderstanding. Tell them you knew. Tell them you gave us permission." "Why would I do that?" "Because we were helping your sister," she cried, the facade of calm finally cracking. "This is the only way we could get her the support she needs. You wouldn't help, so we found our own way. You can't let them ruin this for her." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of her logic stole my breath. In her mind, I was the villain. My refusal to liquidate my life for my sister's benefit had forced them into this deception. My boundaries were the problem, not their violation of them. "My house is not a community center, and it's not a business," I said, each word a small, hard stone. "What you did was wrong. You lied to me, you used me, and you put me at risk." "We were creating a space for healing," my father's voice cut in, taking the phone from her. "It was beautiful, important work. You wouldn't understand. Your world is so small, Cora. So concerned with things, with walls, with what is yours. "Yes," I said, and for the first time, I felt a surge of pride in that fact. "Yes, it is. And you trespassed in it." I ended the call before he could reply. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the taxi window and watched the city lights blur into streaks of color. I felt a strange and terrible sense of peace. The kind of peace that comes after a storm has leveled everything to the ground. There was nothing left to break. The aftermath was quiet and bureaucratic. There were no dramatic courtroom scenes, just a series of letters and legal notices. My parents were fined for operating an unlicensed business out of a residential zone. One of the workshop attendees, horrified at having been filmed during an intensely personal moment, threatened a lawsuit for invasion of privacy, which was settled out of court for a sum that I later learned drained most of my parents' savings. Their network of healers and participants dissolved overnight, frightened away by the police involvement and the taint of illegality. The beautiful, important work was over. My sister called me once, a week after I returned home. Her voice was laced with an acrid resentment. "I hope you're happy," she said, without any preamble. "What?" "They were doing it for us, Cora. For me and my kids. And you destroyed it. You called the cops on your own parents." "I didn't call the police, Lena. And they weren't just doing it for you. They were lying to me and using my home. It was just a house. You were never even there. It was empty space," she insisted, her voice rising. "Now, because of you, they can't help us with the rent anymore. We're going to have to move. Are you satisfied now that you've protected your precious space?" The chasm between our perspectives was too wide to cross. She saw my home as a resource she was entitled to. She saw my desire for privacy as a personal attack on her needs. She could not, or would not, see me. "Did you know, Lena?" I asked quietly. "Did you know they were using my house, specifically? Did you know they were lying to me about it?" There was a long silence on the line. And in that silence, I had my answer. "It doesn't matter," she finally said, her voice small and defensive. "They were just trying to help." "Goodbye, Lena," I said, and I hung up the phone. A few days later, my parents appeared on my doorstep. They looked older, diminished. The self-righteous certainty had been replaced by a weary defensiveness. "We never meant to cause you trouble," my father began, avoiding my eyes. "We just wanted to build community," my mother added, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. "To help people. To help Lena. We thought you'd eventually understand. That you'd be proud of us." I looked at their faces, searching for a flicker of remorse, a glimmer of understanding for what they had done to me. I found none. They were sorry for the consequences, sorry they had been caught. but they were not sorry for the act itself. In their story, they were still the heroes, and I was just a footnote, an obstacle they had failed to navigate. "I'm selling the house," I said. The words came out more easily than I expected. My mother's face fell. "Cora, no. You love this place. This garden." "I did," I said. "But it's not mine anymore." "You made sure of that. You took the peace from it." I didn't invite them in. They stood on the porch for a few more minutes, offering hollow apologies and justifications that drifted away on the breeze. I listened, but I didn't absorb them. They weren't for me. They were for them, a way to reshape the narrative into something they could live with. When they finally left, I closed the door and felt, for the first time in a long time, the quiet click of a lock securing a space that was truly my own. I sold the cottage a month later to a young couple who fell in love with the garden. I didn't watch them move in. I packed up my life, my books, my clothes, the few things that still felt like they belonged only to me, and moved to a small, clean-lined apartment in a different city, one where nobody knew my name. There was no grand reconciliation. No tearful, final confrontation. Our family didn't shatter, it simply dissolved, like salt in water. The calls stopped. The texts went unanswered. We drifted apart into separate, silent orbits, held apart by a universe of things unsaid and unforgiven. My new apartment has a small balcony. It gets the afternoon sun. Last week, I bought 3 terracotta pots and a bag of soil. I planted lavender, rosemary, and mint. It's not a garden, not yet. It's just a beginning. As I push my fingers into the cool, dark earth, I feel a quiet sense of hope. I am learning that the most important space you can ever cultivate is the one within yourself. And I am finally learning how to be a devoted and gentle keeper of my own peace.